All right, y'all gather round. While you're roasting those marshmallows and finishing up those burgers, let me tell you about a group of campers not too different from us. This group of teenagers was all set to enjoy a long weekend camping in the woods. Most of them had never been camping before. Heck, most of them hadn't even slept outside before. And after this trip, some of them would never, ever do it again. The woods were dark, very dark. The campfire sputtered. Shadows danced. They twisted and turned like creepy fingers. The group of teenagers huddled near the warmth. They were telling scary stories. With each story, the group got just a bit bolder and had to tell a new story that was scarier than the last. "Did you hear that?" whispered Meg. "Hear what?" asked Josh. "I thought I heard something moving out in the cornfield," Meg said. Earlier that day, the teenagers had hiked to the campsite. They had started their journey early in the morning, with the sun just beginning to rise. The forest was dense and the trail was barely visible, making their hike both challenging and adventurous. It was a long and tiring journey. The group had to take several breaks to catch their breath and rehydrate. Each step seemed heavier than the last, but their spirits remained high as they pushed forward. They were happy to finally set up camp. The clearing they found was perfect, surrounded by tall trees that provided a sense of security. They worked together, pitching tents and gathering firewood, their laughter echoing through the forest. The woods seemed to press in on them. The dense foliage created an almost impenetrable wall around their campsite, making them feel both isolated and protected. The trees were tall and dark. Their towering presence was both awe-inspiring and intimidating, casting long shadows that danced with the flickering light of their campfire. Their branches intertwined overhead, blocking out the sun. The canopy was so thick that only slivers of light managed to pierce through, creating a dim, almost twilight atmosphere even in the middle of the day. The air was thick and still. It felt as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Every sound seemed amplified, from the rustling of leaves to the distant call of a bird. "I can't believe we're actually here," said Emily. Her eyes were wide with wonder as she took in the beauty and mystery of the forest. It was a place they had only heard about in stories, and now they were living it. "This place is creepy," whispered Ben, looking around nervously. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, the shadows playing tricks on his mind. Despite his fear, he knew this adventure would be one they would never forget. As the teenagers continued their hike, they noticed something strange. It was a scarecrow, standing eerily still in the distance. It stood in the middle of a cornfield, just off the trail. The field seemed out of place, almost as if it had appeared out of nowhere. The scarecrow was tall and menacing, its presence casting a long shadow over the cornfield. It wore a dark, tattered coat and a wide-brimmed hat, which flapped slightly in the breeze, adding to its eerie appearance. Its face was hidden in shadows, making it impossible to see any features. The darkness seemed to swallow its face entirely. "That scarecrow is giving me the creeps," said Josh, his voice trembling slightly. The others nodded in agreement, their eyes never leaving the scarecrow. The teenagers continued on their way, but they couldn't shake the feeling that the scarecrow was watching them. Every rustle of the leaves, every whisper of the wind seemed to carry the scarecrow's silent gaze. They quickened their pace, eager to leave the unsettling figure behind, but the memory of its presence lingered long after they had left the cornfield. The next day, two of the teenagers went for a hike. They passed by the cornfield again. The scarecrow was still there, but something was different. It seemed to be in a different spot, closer to the trail. "I swear that scarecrow wasn't this close yesterday," said Meg. "You're just imagining things," said Josh. They went about their business and joined back up with the rest of their group. The following morning, the full group was out for a hike and they saw the scarecrow again. This time it was even closer. "Okay, this time I mean it. It's even closer today than it was yesterday," exclaimed Meg. "What is happening?" Meg said. They began to search for the scarecrow. fully believing it had to be someone dressed up, playing pranks on them. The corn was tall and thick. It was difficult to see where they were going, but they were now determined. "Okay, this is starting to freak me out," said Josh. The teenagers decided to get a closer look. They walked towards the scarecrow, but a loud crash behind them caused them all to turn away. "That sounded like something fell out of a tree," Josh said. When they turned back to the scarecrow, the goosebumps hit them and their jaws dropped. The scarecrow was gone. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cornfield. The air was thick with the scent of earth and the rustling of dry leaves. It was the perfect setting for a mystery. "Where did it go?" asked Emily, her voice tinged with a mix of curiosity and fear. They had all seen the scarecrow just moments ago, standing tall and eerie in the middle of the field. The teenagers looked around, but the scarecrow was gone. It was as if it had simply evaporated into thin air. They searched the area, hoping to find some clue, but there was nothing. No tracks, no disturbed earth, not a single clue that a scarecrow had ever been there. The group was on edge. Panic set in. The teenagers ran out of the cornfield, their hearts pounding in their chests. They didn't dare look back, afraid of what they might see. The once familiar field now felt like a maze of terror. They didn't stop running until they reached their campsite. The safety of their tents and the warmth of the campfire seemed like a distant comfort. They were out of breath and terrified. Each one of them was trying to make sense of what had just happened. The scarecrow's disappearance was beyond their understanding. "What was that?" asked Meg, her voice barely a whisper. She looked around at her friends, hoping someone had an answer. "I don't know," said Josh, shaking his head. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by a deep sense of unease. "But I don't want to find out," he added, his voice trembling. The others nodded in agreement. The scarecrow's sudden disappearance had left them all feeling vulnerable. The teenagers huddled around the campfire, too scared to sleep. The flickering flames cast eerie shadows on their faces, making the night feel even more ominous. They kept looking out into the darkness, expecting to see the scarecrow emerge from the trees at any moment. The forest remained silent, adding to their growing sense of dread. The night was long, filled with the sounds of the forest and the occasional rustle of leaves. An animal of some sort, perhaps a coyote, was heard cackling, but it didn't sound close enough to be of concern. Then they heard it, the loud crashing sound. This time it was louder and felt closer. They felt the earth tremble as if something large had fallen. And then they saw it. The scarecrow. It was just at the edge of the campfire light, almost looking like it was trying to hide next to a tree. But its gaze was unmistakable. It was looking right at them, the fire reflecting off of its eyes, making them appear to glow in a disturbing amber. "What do you want from us?" Jay shouted. Tony had enough of the prankster and stood up to go tackle it, but as he began his sprint once again, the scarecrow vanished. It was as though he simply closed those glowing amber eyes, and the entire scarecrow disappeared. Meg asked, "Okay, you guys saw that, right? It was here. It was at our camp." Nobody got any sleep that night. There weren't any other disturbances, but everyone was wide awake and scared to death that it would come back. Jay kept adding wood to the fire, determined to keep it burning until the morning light returned. When the sun finally broke through the darkness, the campers sighed in collective relief. They had already been packing up most of their gear and broken down the tents. It was time to leave. Reluctantly, their route back to their cars would take them right past the cornfield. None of them wanted to see the scarecrow again, but they also didn't want to get lost or be there any longer, so they agreed to go. I mean, the scarecrow won't even be there anymore, right? He vanished from the cornfield and then showed up at our camp. He won't be back at the field, Josh said confidently. But in the back of his mind, he too was terrified to see it again. Meg screamed when they came within sight of the cornfield, and there once again was the scarecrow, perched back up in what seemed to be the original spot from their trek into camp. "Don't stop, don't even look at it, just go," Tony said. The group hurried past the cornfield and made it back to their vehicles. None of the group ever returned to those woods. Meg and Josh would spend the rest of their lives without even considering camping again. Tony, well, he was a camper long before his friends, and he did continue to camp, even solo, whenever he could find the time to get away. A few folks in the group maintained contact well into their adult lives. None of them ever had any more dealings with that scarecrow or prankster, whatever it was. And really, that is the concerning part of that story. What was it? A monster? A prankster? Could it have just been their collective imagination? We may never know for sure. Now, who's coming with me in the dark back to that cornfield we passed on the way into camp? What? Aren't you guys in the mood for some corn on the cob? Ha ha.